I realized that I didn't know my wife at all. It seemed to me that she was my soulmate and we were made for each other. But my illusion was shattered against reality. But I had a trump card up my sleeve that my cheating wife didn't even know about and thought I was just a worthless guy. You should have seen her face.
It was time for me to move forward. My SUV was parked in the airport's long-term parking lot. I estimated I had about 2 weeks before anyone noticed the prolonged presence of the vehicle. Carrying only my briefcase and a travel bag, I headed towards the Delta terminal. Inside my briefcase were all my identification documents, a few $1,000s in various bills, and my travel papers. To an outsider, everything would seem completely ordinary, unless they knew me personally. You see, all the documents bore a different name, but my face was on them where photos were required, including my driver's license and passport. I was embarking on a new life with a new identity. Upon entering the terminal, I commenced the boarding process. The TSA operated with great efficiency. They examined my ticket, x-rayed my briefcase, wallet, and car keys. Finding no bombs, water bottles, or other prohibited items, they correctly assessed that I posed no threat and allowed me to proceed. My next destination is the men's room, where I step into a stall and begin shedding my outer garments. Beneath them, I have a fresh set of clothes ready. Transforming from a suited businessman to a casual tourist, I don a flashy shirt, shorts, and summery shoes. Emerging from the restroom, I blend in with the passengers returning from a flight from Las Vegas, resembling just another tourist from the City of Fun. Following the crowd to baggage claim, I claim a nondescript suitcase left unattended on the conveyor belt. With no one noticing, I swiftly take it and exit through the doors. Boarding the interterminal transport, I disembark at another terminal after 10 minutes. Entering the men's room once more, I discard another layer of clothing into the stolen suitcase. Approaching the ticket counter, I check in my acquired bag, present one of my new IDs, and retrieve my boarding pass. Rather than confronting the TSA checkpoint, I navigate through the bustling shopping area, slowly making my way towards the exits. Soon, I find myself back on the tram heading towards Continental's terminal, where this time I plan to board a plane and leave the airport behind. Before long, I'm aboard one of their international flights, successfully assuming a new identity. A fresh chapter of my life begins now. My cheating wife will never locate me or my money. Allow me to elucidate the catalyst behind this endeavor of altering my identity. Let me commence by introducing myself. I hail from Western New York State, born in 1960. My high school graduation placed me somewhere in the middle of my class, neither academically nor physically remarkable. I was just an average youngster. My parents were not affluent professionals. My mother tended to household duties while my father toiled in construction. I pursued higher education at a local college while residing at home. During the academic term, I held a part-time position at a fast food establishment, and during summer breaks I assisted my father in construction. My college performance was unremarkable, maintaining a modest 2.6 GPA throughout 4 years. Juggling work and academics, I failed to devote myself entirely to my studies, merely doing enough to scrape through. Upon earning my business degree, I ventured into the professional realm, only to encounter disappointment as prestigious firms overlooked me. My average academic record from an ordinary college and a conventional business program failed to capture attention amidst the sea of outstanding graduates. Consequently, my time was consumed by job hunting rather than pursuing lofty career prospects. Eventually, I secured employment with a small property management company. Instead of a corner office with a personal secretary, I was assigned a desk, a telephone, and a plethora of responsibilities for meager starting pay. My collegiate aspirations of a formal attire, structured hours, and corporate setting were shattered. I quickly discovered that in a small business, everyone wore multiple hats. I handled tasks such as collecting overdue rent from tenants, assisting with evictions, and interviewing prospective tenants. I even pitched in with the maintenance team, helping to clean and paint units for new tenants. While the pay wasn't substantial, I gained invaluable experience in the real estate industry by diving into every aspect of the business. As I immersed myself in learning, I developed a deep passion, not for a romantic partner, but for the real estate profession itself. My boss, the owner, noticed my growing enthusiasm for the field and took me under his wing. Despite having adult children of his own, none shared his interest in inheriting the business. It seemed I became the surrogate child he had always desired, someone to impart his wisdom to. One day, he summoned me to his office. "Billy, take a look at these bank foreclosures and give me your thoughts on potential investments," he instructed. "I've never tackled this before," I confessed. "Don't worry, I'll review your suggestions before making any decisions, but I need your findings after lunch," he replied. With lunch at his company scheduled for noon and the time nearing 10 o'clock, I realized I had little time to spare. "He's given me quite a tight deadline," I thought to myself. Skipping lunch, I devoted the next 3 hours to examining the listings. Eventually, I identified a few properties that I believed would pique his interest. At precisely 1 o'clock, I presented my recommendations to him. He listened attentively for nearly an hour before interjecting. "So far, everything you've chosen is subpar," he remarked bluntly. "Come here, and I'll demonstrate how it's done," he invited. Over the remainder of the week, we meticulously evaluated the options. By the end, we had pinpointed several properties with promising potential. It was a week of immense learning, during which I also came to recognize that my unassuming boss was, in fact, a real estate prodigy. He participated in the bidding for 4 of our selections and succeeded in winning only 1. The successful bid was for a 4-family apartment building constructed in the early 1910s. It was located in a neighborhood situated on the outskirts of an affluent area populated by young married couples and college students. Although the building required extensive renovation, we acquired it at a remarkably low price, and the bank agreed to provide all necessary construction loans while postponing the mortgage payments for 6 months. Essentially, this meant that we acquired the building with minimal upfront costs and had sufficient funds to carry out the necessary renovations. At the closing, he handed me the keys and remarked, "It's your project now. Get started tomorrow." Over the following 6 months, I experienced a roller coaster of emotions, ranging from elation to despair and back again. In the midst of it all, I gained valuable insights into the rental business. By the time the first mortgage payment came due, all the apartments were rented out, and things were beginning to run smoothly. Shortly afterward, my boss surprised me once more. "Bill, sign these papers for the 4-family property we purchased." "Of course, but why?" I inquired. "Because I'm transferring ownership to you. It's your building now," he explained. "What?" I exclaimed in disbelief. "Bill, I'm getting older, and I want to pass on my knowledge to someone. I hope you'll allow me to pass it on to you. My children will likely sell off all my properties when I'm gone, as is their birthright. So let's kickstart your own real estate business. Consider this my small gift to you." And that's how it all began. Soon I established Bilco Properties, LLC, and embarked on my journey in the real estate industry. About 5 years later, my friend and mentor passed away. As he had foreseen, his children liquidated all his assets, seeking top market value for each item. Eventually, they found a buyer willing to meet their price. By that time, I had accumulated 15 properties of my own, all situated in prime locations and fully occupied. My financial strategy relied on rental income, with the aim that if at least half of a property was leased, it covered all associated expenses. Fortunately, most of my buildings maintained full occupancy. While I wasn't wealthy, I was also not facing financial difficulties. Things were going reasonably well. I seized the opportunity to acquire several commercial properties when the individual who had purchased my late boss's business went bankrupt. His misguided belief that hiring excessive staff and spending most of his time on the golf course would suffice had worked to my advantage. I was 30 years old when I encountered the woman who would later become my wife. Having bought a piece of commercial real estate in a decent neighborhood, she and a friend rented one of the office spaces to establish a decorating business. When they first met me, I was dressed in my usual attire, blending in as just another laborer. In contrast, they were impeccably dressed, resembling models straight out of a fashion magazine. Perhaps as interior decorators, they felt the need to leave a lasting impression. And they certainly did, especially Wendy, the more assertive of the pair, who captured my heart. In my imagination, I envisioned Wendy standing in front of a charming cottage enveloped in vines, with two young children eagerly awaiting their father's return from work. And in that picture, I saw myself as the husband she awaited. When I presented the rental price to them, their expressions suggested they couldn't afford the place. Since this building has quite a few vacancies, though I fibbed there was only one other vacancy, I can offer you a discounted introductory rate for the first year, I proposed. How much of a reduction? They asked simultaneously. Probably about half, if that works for you. The owner allows me some flexibility in setting introductory rates. They eagerly accepted my offer and signed a 1-year lease with an option for another year, with the rent to be determined later. Could we have the owner's name and address to express our gratitude? Wendy inquired. I provided them with a fake first name and my mother's maiden name, along with the company's P.O. box. I explained that the owner preferred not to be bothered, so a brief note would suffice. Over the next year, I assisted them with various issues while disguised as just another employee. I observed their small business gradually gaining momentum. By the beginning of their second year, they renewed their lease at a higher rate, albeit still around 25% lower than what other tenants were paying. As I mentioned earlier, they were truly lovely people. Wendy, the one I had feelings for, informed me one day that her partner was getting married and would be relocating to the West Coast with her new spouse before our lease ended. She asked, "Can we break the lease? I don't think I can manage it financially with my partner leaving. I'm not sure about breaking the lease, but I can lower the rent back to its previous level. My boss dislikes vacant office spaces." In reality, I didn't want her to leave. Her face lit up with a broad smile, and I received a kiss. That kiss sealed it for me. I fell in love. Later, as we parted, she gave me a different look and a special smile. That marked the beginning of our relationship. A year later, I found myself exchanging vows at the altar. Within a year of marriage, our daughter was born. Wendy struggled during pregnancy and childbirth. Her doctor advised against further pregnancies, so she opted for tubal ligation. Although our sex life remained satisfying, her desire for intimacy decreased while mine remained unchanged. Wendy's libido diminished. She redirected her efforts toward her business thereafter. Unaware of my true role, she began treating me with little respect, seeing herself as the primary breadwinner. I attempted to convey that I owned multiple properties, but she never gave me the chance. Whenever I tried, I was met with, "I don't want to hear about your work. It's dull." To maintain my family, I accepted her low opinion of me. She remained beautiful, while I felt average. By tolerating her criticisms, I preserved my marriage and family with my lovely wife and daughter. My daughter quickly became the center of my world. When I wasn't engrossed in a real estate deal, I dedicated every spare moment to her. Witnessing her growth was my sole purpose for persevering through life. Unfortunately, Wendy and I grew apart as she was lured away by wealthy clients. Nevertheless, I persisted in my property investments, some for the long term, others for quick profit. Unbeknownst to Wendy, I was gradually accumulating wealth. As Wendy grew increasingly disdainful and distant, I found myself relegated to the spare bedroom, with reasons cited such as excessive snoring and disruptive sleep habits. Despite being allowed occasional visits to our bed, these dwindled over time. However, I tolerated this situation solely for the sake of my daughter. Confronting Wendy risked divorce, wherein the common belief was that the mother would retain custody, and the father would be left with financial burdens. My love for my daughter prevented me from accepting the prospect of being cut out of her life by a selfish spouse. I directed my frustration and solitude into my real estate venture, operating my company with fervor akin to a covert operation. Employing a network of interconnected corporations, multiple P.O. boxes, and diverse office fronts, most of my staff operated from separate locations. Within my main office, only my loyal bookkeeper and I occupied the space, with other employees assuming I was merely another worker. I never bothered to correct their assumptions. By the time my daughter Amy turned 15, I possessed approximately $25 million worth of mortgage-free properties, along with an additional $50 million in properties burdened with mortgage debt. These holdings were registered under various corporate entities across different addresses, with rent payments directed to various P.O. boxes. Some of the rental income was diverted to offshore numbered accounts to evade taxation. By this point, I had amassed considerable wealth. I possessed nearly 100 properties, but they had evolved from the simple 3- and 4-family apartment buildings I initially invested in. They now included large apartment complexes, strip malls, commercial office space in 10 to 20-story buildings, and even a sizable shopping mall. Over the years, Amy and I had developed a strong bond. I took on the role of the consistent parent in her life, attending her sports games, comforting her when she was sick, and accompanying her on shopping trips, filling in the gaps left by her busy mother. Meanwhile, Wendy was thriving in her own business endeavors. As I maintained a modest lifestyle and refrained from flaunting my wealth, she continued to perceive herself as the primary breadwinner in our family. I didn't correct her misconceptions, fearing that acknowledging my financial success might lead to divorce. Wendy now viewed me with disdain, seeing me as a failure dependent on her achievements. To elevate my status from that of a second-class citizen in our household, I would need a significant promotion. While I tolerated her behavior towards me, I began to conceal more of my wealth in offshore accounts. As Wendy decided to upgrade, I feared being left with nothing. Wendy, operating a decorating business, needed to employ highly artistic individuals. I admit I harbored some prejudices, feeling uncomfortable around these individuals. Wendy noticed my discomfort and made a deliberate effort to inconvenience me whenever I visited her office, assigning the more flamboyant ones as my assistants. These individuals struggled to respect boundaries, which Wendy found amusing. I did not share her amusement. To me, this was just another manifestation of Wendy's disdain for me. Nonetheless, I endured her treatment. In order to remain in my marriage and be close to my daughter, I allowed myself to become submissive.
My husband Bill was pleasant enough, but he lacked ambition, whereas I was driven, always striving to improve our circumstances. I felt held back by Bill's lack of motivation. While he was an average lover and the father of our only child, he doted on our daughter, treating her like royalty and always being there for her. However, I felt neglected by Bill. I questioned what had attracted me to him in the first place, as he seemed just average to me. He was content in a dead-end job, working as a gopher for a reclusive real estate mogul. When I was starting my business with my friend Millie, Bill was accommodating but essentially just acted as the landlord's assistant. I was able to manipulate him to secure favorable terms on rent and other perks. As Millie and I parted ways during our second year in business, it became evident that we had different approaches. I was assertive, sometimes using flirtation to win over male clients and catering to the interests of female clients who were bi-curious. Millie, unlike me, had strong morals. I enjoyed the excitement of playing around. Millie and I went our separate ways before our second year in business concluded. She relocated to the West Coast with her boyfriend, driven away by my unpleasant behavior. She left me with the business and all its assets, without receiving anything in return. Concerned about affording the full rent for my upscale office suite without Millie's assistance, I used my feminine charms on Bill. As a result, I secured a reduced rent for another year. I expressed gratitude to him with a kiss, initially as a thank you and a playful gesture. However, I unexpectedly found myself enjoying the kiss, feeling a physical response. Perhaps it was due to a lack of fulfilling romantic encounters with either gender for over a month, leaving me feeling somewhat needy. Despite Bill's shortcomings, he proved to be a competent lover. He prioritized my satisfaction, adhering to the principle of ladies first, ensuring I was always pleased before attending to his own needs. This was a refreshing change from my past experiences with inconsiderate male partners who prioritized their pleasure over mine. While my encounters with female partners rarely left me satisfied, my interactions with them were solely business-related, focused on winning their favor rather than personal pleasure. However, outside of the bedroom, Bill was rather dull. He lacked knowledge and interest in current events, literature, art, or other notable figures. Attempting to engage him in conversation at social gatherings often proved futile, as he could only discuss real estate and accounting, topics that bored most of my friends. I attempted to introduce him to cultural outings such as opera performances, philharmonic concerts, and contemporary plays. However, my efforts mainly revolved around struggling to keep him from dozing off, fearing the embarrassment of his snoring. Given my involvement in the decorating business, I found myself obligated to attend various charity functions to boost my visibility and reputation. Despite bringing Bill along to these events, he typically remained passive, making minimal contributions to the evening. His attire often fell short, rendering him more of a hindrance than a help. Though I realized I should have worked on improving his image, I was preoccupied with expanding my business. On one occasion, I received an invitation to a charity event. This time, I chose not to inform Bill until it was too late for him to alter his prior plans. "Bill, I'll be attending the event even if you can't join. It's crucial for my business, and you understand that our lifestyle depends on it," I asserted. "But Wendy, won't it reflect poorly if you go alone?" Bill inquired. "I'll bring one of my decorators along. He'll be flamboyant enough to dispel any assumptions of a romantic involvement," I reassured. It was during this gathering that I encountered James, the individual who would later become my romantic partner. I was positioned at one of the bars, searching for my intended companion. I had a hunch that he had slipped away with another gay attendee, leaving me alone, when this attractive man initiated a conversation with me. "Pardon me, but I couldn't help but notice that you've been abandoned by your escort," James remarked. "I'm James William Hawthorne, and I would be honored to accompany you tonight, if you'd permit me." As I glanced at him, the initial thought that crossed my mind was, wow, he's incredibly attractive. He exuded elegance in his attire and speech, giving off an air of wealth. I agreed to spend the evening with him, and we had a fantastic time together. And during the taxi ride home, I realized I was feeling a bit aroused. It wasn't because of Bill this time. It was James who had stirred these sensations within me. I found myself pondering how James would fare in satisfying me. Would he possess the capability to satisfy me fully? While my husband Bill adored me and always prioritized my pleasure, the rest of the time, he seemed rather dull. About a week later, James called me, inviting me to lunch and seeking my opinion on redecorating his office. And that marked the beginning of it all. Within a month, we became lovers, meeting 2 or 3 afternoons a week in different hotels. He became my lover, but I can't say he surpassed Bill. Bill always prioritized my pleasure, while James treated me more like a sexual object, whereas Bill treated me like a queen. Being with James was exhilarating, even if he only saw me as a sexual object. He pushed me to do things that Bill would never have considered. Some days, I felt sore from the activities James initiated. I craved the degradation, the sensation of being treated like a slut, a mere whore. I embraced my submissive nature while he embodied dominance. I felt destined to satisfy his every desire. Refusing James anything seemed inconceivable. I grew weary of Bill's tender affection. I yearned for James's dominance. I belonged entirely to him. He even began inviting other men into our bed, sharing me with his friends. With the additional partners, my orgasms surpassed any I had ever experienced. I never wanted this arrangement to end. Consequently, I decided to get my own apartment, a space where James and I could spend all our free time together. With determination, I devised and executed a plan. "Bill," I started. I've decided to rent an apartment in the city. The commute from this unattractive farm to my office is eating up too much of my time. It takes nearly an hour each way, time I could better spend on work. I understand your attachment to this farm, but I need to be closer to the city. You and Amy can continue living here without any disruption. But Wendy, he began. I interrupted him. There's no room for debate. My decision is final. I've already chosen between two options, and I'll be moved in by the end of the month. I noticed the hurt in Bill's eyes. Don't worry, honey. I'll still come home on weekends for you and Amy. I proceeded with my plans, with James helping me select a luxurious apartment just minutes away from my office. To involve Bill, I showed him the apartment and asked for his approval. Before he could respond, I added, I knew you'd love it too. I'll use it to showcase my decorating skills. As we left the building, I observed that the building manager recognized Bill. I assumed they had met at some real estate event Bill frequently attended.
Wendy had decided to get an apartment in town to avoid the long daily drive back to our country house, or so she claimed. This was the day I realized my marriage was over. I had suspected Wendy of having an affair, but until now I couldn't be certain. Now there was no doubt. Wendy was unaware that I owned the apartment building where she leased. It was one of my higher-end units. When my manager spotted me, he wanted to discuss matters, but I maintained a facade of mere acquaintanceship, not acknowledging our employer-employee relationship. Later he approached me about my wife and her lover. My heart shattered. Perhaps I still harbored feelings for Wendy, but I was unsure how to cope with her betrayal. My only recourse was to gather enough evidence of her infidelity and questionable character to potentially gain custody of our children. My supervisor informed me that my wife, along with her lover, selected the apartment and completed the application together. They had jointly rented the apartment, which became their love nest. He and I decided to install video and audio surveillance in the apartment before Wendy could move in. I had more than enough funds to cover the expenses for the work and equipment installation, which we arranged to be done in the manager's office. The tenants believed that a new building security system was being installed. This time I ensured that Wendy paid the entire rent, which was slightly higher than other units. However, since her current boyfriend covered the difference, it didn't concern me. I ensured that the apartment was under our name, to prevent any potential legal challenges regarding the admissibility of the evidence gathered through video and audio recordings in court. I began gathering evidence for divorce proceedings. Since Wendy had essentially moved out of our home, my monthly visits to her bedroom ceased. Despite her promises to be home on weekends, she never followed through. I grew close to the 5 sisters, and my purchases of hand cream noticeably increased. When Wendy finally decided to pay a visit home for the weekend, our daughter Amy was overjoyed to have her mother around again. Amy, at that stage in life, where maternal presence was crucial, longed for female bonding and conversations. Dad just didn't fulfill that role anymore. Amy began idealizing her mother and Wendy's lifestyle, and I assumed it was a passing phase, so I went along with it. Little did I realize how mistaken I was. When Wendy finally graced me with a visit to our bed, I found myself unable to perform. Images of her with her lover and the sounds of their encounters filled my mind. She indulged his every desire, acting as his submissive. I could hear him demeaning me as they engaged in intimate acts, with her consenting to his judgment of my inadequacy as a lover and a man. "Bill, what's the matter with you?" she asked after my unsuccessful attempt to become aroused. "We haven't had sex in months, and you can't even get an erection. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you had a girlfriend." "I'm sorry, Wendy, but I have a lot on my mind. I'll do better next time, I promise." But next time never came. Wendy's partner sent the rent payments for her apartment to a rent collection P.O. box, where they eventually reached me. I made copies and deposited the originals into the bank. Many of you might be wondering why I didn't seek a little retaliation while he was involved with my spouse. Well, don't worry, I did. The bank manager I dealt with for my business was not only a good friend of mine, but also of the manager at my wife's lover's bank. Just for kicks, we began monitoring his finances. Before long, we realized he was teetering on the edge financially, and we wanted to lend him a hand. After a few months, we discerned a pattern in his financial activities. It appeared that he frequently found himself short of funds every couple of months and relied on the float time between deposits and withdrawals to get by. His accounts were consistently short of cash, so if his rent check for my wife's apartment was deposited at specific times of the month, it would bounce due to insufficient funds, or even better, cause some of his wife's checks to bounce as well. Do you catch my drift? And thus we began to manipulate his accounts. Before long, he began experiencing financial penalties from my company for bounced checks and overdue rent payments. Additionally, he incurred bank fees for his wife's returned checks. Embarrassingly, many of her checks started getting declined at her preferred stores, leading to awkward situations with her friends when splitting lunch bills. Our scheme was unfolding exactly as planned. The accumulation of returned check fees and penalties adversely affected his credit score, prompting concern from his credit card providers. Although they didn't close his accounts outright, they implemented a more stringent measure by gradually reducing his credit limit to match his outstanding balances, effectively halting any further charges. This restriction also impacted his wife's access to their joint credit cards, causing her frustration as no woman wants her card declined. I found immense satisfaction in these events. In addition to the financial toll of late fees and returned check charges amounting to $200 to $300, he had to navigate uncomfortable conversations with his wife, without revealing that the issues stemmed from the deposit practices of my wife's apartment complex. Undoubtedly, there were intriguing discussions about family finances in his household. My next break seemed heaven-sent. When my wife visited her doctor for female issues, her pap smear indicated she had cancer. Despite our relationship, she didn't confide in me fully, only mentioning she needed surgery for female problems. The truth emerged when our 17-year-old daughter, Amy, revealed she was staying with her mother. "Why, Amy?" I asked. "Have I been a bad father?" "No, Dad, but Mom needs me. She has ovarian cancer, and though you may not love her anymore, I still do. I want to support her through this." Though I missed Amy, I had my own plans. If she chose her mother over me, I accepted it. She was grown now, and perhaps living with her mother would unveil realities about her. The following Sunday I attended church. It had been years since I stepped into the Lord's house, but I felt compelled to express my gratitude. Indeed, my prayers weren't for Wendy's recovery. Rather, they were expressions of gratitude to the Lord for afflicting her with cancer. Strangely, I saw it as a kindness from Him. Wendy was enduring immense suffering, while her lover bore the brunt of it without receiving anything in return. He cleaned up after her, witnessed her physical decline, and saw her transform into a mere shadow of herself. I observed on one of the recordings how he treated Wendy, leaving her in distress until he decided to intervene. It seemed Amy took notice, as she was the one caring for her mother. Following this realization, I arranged a meeting with my lawyer. I outlined my desire to dissolve my marriage without financial repercussions, aside from covering his fees. Additionally, I wanted to ensure that Wendy's lover's wife had all the necessary information to secure her rightful share. Despite the attorney's insistence that we were in a no-fault state and assets would be divided evenly, I was resolute in my alternative plans. I provided him with all the evidence, including video recordings, audio files, copies of rent payments made by Wendy's lover for her apartment, and the rental agreement signed by him and Wendy. I instructed him to organize the paperwork but to delay serving it until I gave the word. My next move involved liquidating all my properties, a process I undertook cautiously to avoid devaluing my holdings too rapidly. Fortunately, luck was on my side. The real estate market was thriving, with new firms entering the scene and engaging in competitive bidding wars for some of my prime properties. As a result, I often exceeded my initial expectations in terms of returns. Satisfied with the outcomes, I gradually cleared out our personal belongings from the house and sold it off. The closing was scheduled for the day after my wife was served with divorce papers. 6 months later, I instructed my lawyer to provide everything necessary for the wife of my wife's lover to proceed with her divorce. He ended up moving in with my wife and daughter after his own wife kicked him out. However, their happiness was short-lived when they discovered they were financially destitute. His wife froze his assets, while I ensured that my wife's accounts were emptied into offshore holdings. Both of them were left penniless. One day, I received a message from Phil, the building manager of my wife's apartment, urging me to watch a video he was sending. The message simply stated, "Your daughter is in trouble." A few months ago, I stopped watching videos from Wendy's apartment. My lawyer assured me that we have enough evidence of her infidelity for a divorce. So I felt alarmed when Phil, the building manager, contacted me. On that day, the evidence disk was deleted by the Postal Service. The contents were arranged chronologically starting about 4 months ago. It all started with the fact that the lover of my cheating wife slipped something into a drink for my adult daughter and took advantage of the opportunity. Amy cried for hours, but she didn't leave. She repeated her protest. "Why did you let this happen, Mom?" In the following scenes, it becomes apparent how her partner introduces her to illegal substances, and Amy gets excited about the thrill. He often resorted to using physical force against her. His actions showed sadistic tendencies, which led Amy to beg him to refrain from exploiting her. I observed the footage captured from my wife's bedroom. She was awake, hearing Amy being taken advantage of. I witnessed the tears in her eyes, yet she made no move to intervene. She was too ensnared by his dominance to resist his cruel nature. Instead, she remained passive, allowing Amy to fulfill his desires. The worst clip was shot one night when a lover brought a couple of really disgusting-looking guys into the apartment. The three of them were having fun with Amy, and it was disgusting. In the video, one of the people entered Wendy's bedroom and greeted her with the words, "Hi, Mom. Your daughter is amazing. She's very smart. I would have complimented you too, but you don't look well right now. However, let's say your daughter is amazing," he boasted. By the time I realized this, it was too late to defend myself against Love Boy and his companions. Amy willingly participated in activities related to illegal substances. The recorded videos spanned approximately 4 months, during which Amy was already deeply involved. When I finally saw them, it was too late for me to step in and help my daughter. At 4 a.m., after I stopped crying, I called my lawyer and left a message begging him to intervene. I begged him to take her out of that apartment before someone hurt her. Legally, I understood that there wasn't much I could do now that she turned 18. But I couldn't sit idly by. Amy might be an adult, but she was still my little girl. Although my feelings for Wendy had weakened, I couldn't ignore what was happening to our daughter. The next day, my lawyer called me back. He promised to explore options for how to help Amy, but warned that since she was an adult, her choices were beyond his control. Later that day, he called again. Alan informed me that my 18-year-old daughter was pregnant, and claimed that my wife's lover was to blame for everything. He also said that one evening, when Lyubov and Amy were working at the hotel bar, their client turned out to be an undercover policeman. Consequently, the lover was arrested on charges including facilitating the commission of offenses by minors, as well as on various other counts related to prohibited substances. I hadn't anticipated him being acquitted, but as a precaution, I forwarded the recordings from Wendy's apartment to both the police and the local news outlets. Given the ensuing media attention, I was confident that Loverboy would find it difficult to find employment in town again. Furthermore, the publicity bolstered his wife's position in their divorce settlement. Loverboy was behind bars awaiting trial due to his inability to post bail. Similarly, my daughter was incarcerated because we couldn't afford her bail. During a conversation with my lawyer, Alan, we deliberated over Amy's situation. Alan advised me to leave her in custody and assured me that he would arrange for her to receive treatment. He explained that if I paid her bail, she might relapse and end up back on the streets. It was preferable to keep her in a setting where she could receive help and where he could monitor her progress. Later that day, I utilized the footage to digitally alter only the men's faces. 3 weeks later, those same individuals were discovered beaten to death in an alley behind their favorite bar. Fortunately for Loverboy, he was incarcerated at the time. Otherwise, he might have met the same fate. As it happens, one of my storefronts was leased to individuals with ties to organized crime who owed me a favor. In the interim, my wife had been neglecting her business while undergoing treatment. A couple of her employees, with my assistance, ventured into their own decorating business and departed, taking most of her clientele. Consequently, her business collapsed, leading to eviction from her office suite by her landlord. Guess who? She found herself penniless and without a source of income. Health insurance wasn't an option for her. She reached out to me to be included in my policy, but unfortunately, my policy didn't cover pre-existing conditions. I had always been adept at planning ahead. Fast forward to the present moment in my story. I found myself aboard a plane bound for South America, ensuring no trace could be left behind. Upon landing in Cancun, I planned to assume a new identity before catching a flight to Europe. In Europe, another identity change awaited me as I headed towards warmer climates. This strategy ensured that neither my wife nor local law enforcement could locate me in connection with the incidents of assault. Before departing for Australia, I contacted my lawyer, Alan. He informed me that my daughter, Amy, was attempting to reach out to me, seeking reconciliation. Somehow, she had learned about my considerable wealth. My attorney informed her that I had disappeared, and unless I chose otherwise, I couldn't be located again. I instructed Alan to use some of my funds to prepare a defense for Amy. Moreover, I advised him to prolong her time in jail because she was making progress in overcoming her drug addiction there. I feared that if she returned to the streets, she would relapse into her old habits. My research indicated that crystal meth was a particularly difficult drug to quit, often requiring 3 and 4 relapses before achieving sobriety if the user was truly committed. 6 months later, I contacted my lawyer to check on the progress of my divorce proceedings. To my surprise, my lawyer revealed that a divorce wasn't necessary as my wife had passed away from cancer before it could be finalized. Since we were still legally married and she had no financial means, I was responsible for covering her medical expenses. She passed away in a charity ward, alone and in pain, without any visitors. Despite our estrangement caused by her actions and greed, I felt a pang of guilt as she had once been the love of my life. Nonetheless, she still occupied a small corner of my heart. While I was abroad, in hiding, my daughter Amy was incarcerated when Wendy passed away. There wasn't a funeral held for Wendy. Alan informed me, "Her ashes are being held at the county coroner's office awaiting someone to claim them. If no one comes forward, she'll be laid to rest alongside other unclaimed individuals in an unmarked grave." Alan paused, anticipating my reaction. Perhaps he expected me to offer to take responsibility for Wendy's remains. No chance, I thought. She inflicted too much pain and humiliation on me throughout the years for me to forgive her now. I feigned interest and inquired about my daughter. She miscarried in the 4th month due to an STD. Presently, she's serving a 12-month sentence for prostitution and drug possession. But she's enrolled in a promising addiction program and appears to be making strides. How about Loverboy? I inquired. Though I was already aware of his fate, as my friends had taken care of him for me, I feigned ignorance. He perished in a brawl in the prison yard. His type of criminal isn't well received behind bars. Well, if Amy approaches you about her mother's arrangements, provide her with the necessary funds. If she's leading a clean, drug-free life, support her financially until she completes her education and can sustain herself. If she's still struggling with addiction, then offer her enough to overdose. Afterwards, bury them both in unmarked graves, I stated. I know it sounds harsh, but I'd rather have my daughter dead than see her living as an addict on the streets. If she overdosed, at least she would exit life without prolonged suffering. If she lived on the streets, she'd likely meet a grim end at the hands of a pimp or predator. I didn't want her to endure such agony if she couldn't overcome her addiction. However, if Amy managed to defy the odds, recover, and maintain sobriety, I suppose I'd ensure she had the means for a fresh start. After all, I had millions. A few dollars for my child's well-being wouldn't be a burden. Maybe, just maybe, she could overcome the odds. 4 years later, I made a stop in town to visit Alan, my former attorney. We hadn't spoken in years. He was retiring and closing his practice. I wanted to drop by, wish him well in retirement, and offer him a monetary gift. He was a true friend. In fact, he was my only friend. I was a solitary old man. No one cared about my existence except him. While cruising through town in my new Bentley, memories flooded back to me. Some were delightful, while others, well, you can guess. I took the opportunity to drive around and revisit some of the properties I once owned. Thankfully, many of the areas where I had invested in apartments had thrived over the years, and my former holdings looked impressive. Similarly, my old commercial properties showed promising signs of appreciation. It's a pity that divorcing Wendy compelled me to sell these units and conceal my wealth. I often pondered whether disclosing all my holdings to Wendy might have garnered more respect from her. But it's too late now to entertain that notion. I parked my car in front of my attorney's offices and entered the building, one of the few properties still under my ownership. I had retained it specifically because it housed my lawyer's practice. I wanted to ensure his safety so he could continue to protect my interests. Now that he was retiring, I intended to deed the building to him as a gesture of gratitude and to provide for his old age. It was my gift to him. "Ah, you old bastard," Alan, my lawyer, greeted me as I entered. "It takes one to know one," I replied with a smirk. We embraced and exchanged pleasantries, reminiscing about the intervening years and catching up on each other's lives. Eventually, Alan broached the topic of my daughter, Amy. "Not particularly interested, but I assume you're going to tell me anyway," I responded. Alan proceeded to share the news about Amy's progress since her release from jail, detailing her successful completion of a drug rehabilitation program and her subsequent role as a counselor. Despite my sarcastic reaction, a part of me felt relieved that she had overcome her addiction. Alan continued with more positive news about Amy's achievements, including her enrollment in a social worker program at the local college and her upcoming graduation. He mentioned that I had funded her education, albeit with some creative interpretation of my instructions. Before parting, Alan suggested I meet my son-in-law, Frank Murphy, and my granddaughter, Vivian, who was nearly 7 months old. He described Vivian as developing a charming personality, predicting she would grow up to be a real beauty, a potential heartbreaker, just like her grandmother. As I thought about this, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Alan continued, "You also covered all their expenses beyond what his meager income could handle, including hiring a nanny named Chloe. I arranged for her to live in the apartment across the hall from the kids and had her pretend to be just a helpful neighbor, claiming she was bored in retirement and wanted to assist. Her constant availability for babysitting allowed Amy to focus on her studies and enabled Frank to advance in his job. Under pressure, I agreed to stay in town for the graduation and attend the event. As the graduation approached, Alan somehow arranged for us not only to attend the ceremonies, but also the pre- and post-events. At one of the pre-gatherings, I spotted my daughter and her husband. I was impressed. It had been years since I had seen Amy, and she had inherited her mother's beauty. I had always known that my daughter had inherited her mother's genes, but Amy turned out to be stunning. She was the spitting image of her mother, the only woman I had ever loved. I felt a twinge of sadness in my heart. I realized that this graduation might be more difficult for me than I had anticipated. Taking my friend aside from the crowd, I said, "I don't want to insert myself into Amy's life anymore. So don't expect me to rush up and greet them. It's just too hard. Promise me that." "I promise," he replied. The following day, Alan and I took our seats roughly halfway up the stands. We listened as each graduating student was called to the stage, with their parents and friends erupting into applause or cheers as they received their diplomas. When it was my daughter's turn, her husband stood holding their baby, visibly moved to tears. The applause for her seemed to resonate louder than for the others, filling me with a sense of pride. As my daughter approached the center of the stage, the dean halted her. "With great pleasure, I present this special award to you, Amy Murphy," he announced. "You have been chosen by both your peers and the faculty for this honor. Mrs. Murphy, your selfless acts of encouragement have touched many lives. Your efforts have resulted in a higher graduation rate for this class than any other in the school's history, with nearly 0 dropouts since your enrollment. Alongside your diploma, you will receive a certificate of appreciation signed by every member of this class and the faculty. Amy, you are loved and will be dearly missed." As Amy made her way across the stage, she was met with a standing ovation. In that moment, my heart swelled with pride as a parent. I realized that I felt more for her at that instant than I did the day she was born. My daughter had blossomed into an extraordinary individual, and I couldn't be happier for her. After the ceremony concluded, I made my way back to my car. However, the aisles were congested with students and visitors, making it difficult to navigate. As I moved through the crowd, I tried to keep a low profile to avoid being recognized. Suddenly, I spotted my daughter, her husband, and my grandchild walking up the aisle nearby. "Damn," I muttered to myself, wishing for a hole to magically appear so I could disappear into it. But there was no escape, and I felt trapped. While my daughter and her husband remained oblivious to my presence, my granddaughter noticed me. I observed her closely as she observed me, tightly holding onto her father's neck while keeping an eye on me. At nearly 9 months old, she seemed independent and aware. In her childish voice, she began chanting, "Bopa," a common term for grandfathers. She continued chanting and gesturing excitedly, attempting to wriggle free from her father's grasp. Amy reached over to take the baby from her husband's arms, following her gaze to where the baby was pointing. Unbeknownst to me, Chloe had been showing my granddaughter my picture and explaining who I was. The child had evidently learned well. To her credit, Amy remained composed. She greeted me with a simple, "Hi, Dad," expressing gratitude for my support over the years. Alan had apparently divulged my involvement in their lives about a month prior. Later, I discovered that Alan had been silently protecting this small family for years. He had also informed Amy that it was my financial support that had sustained her education and other expenses. He was playing the role of the father I couldn't be, yet still acknowledging my contribution. I gazed at her and smiled warmly. "I wouldn't have missed your graduation for anything in the world. Covering your expenses was the least I could do. After all, I was the one who left you on your own." Amy's husband glanced at me, visibly unsure of how to navigate this unexpected encounter. I reached out to steady him, sensing his unease. Meanwhile, my granddaughter tugged at my shirt, exclaiming, "Bopa, oopie!" Amy, my daughter, spoke up. "Vivian wants you to hold her, Dad. Would you like to carry your granddaughter?" Before I could respond, I found myself lifting the thrilled little girl into my arms. She clung to me tightly, proudly declaring to anyone within earshot that I was her Bopa. In that moment, I was captivated. This precious child had already found her way into my heart. Suddenly, I was a grandfather, a father, and a father-in-law, reveling in every precious moment. It seemed as though my years of solitude were coming to an end, my heart beginning to mend. Soon, we found ourselves in one of the expansive parking lots with Alan, my attorney. "Bill, let's head to a restaurant in your car and catch up with your family. There's a lot of catching up to do after all these years." My son-in-law Frank was astonished when he realized we were approaching a Bentley Mulsanne, a vehicle worth $300,000, his amazement evident on his face as he stopped and stared. I passed him the keys. "Interested in driving, son?" I inquired. The radiance of his smile outshone the lights in the parking lot. It seemed he was eager to take the wheel. We made our way across the lot to his worn-out old Ford to gather the car seat and other essentials for traveling with a young child. Surveying the car, I made a decision. Tomorrow, he would receive his own set of keys to the Bentley. I would procure another car for myself later. Once on the road, I found myself seated in the back beside my granddaughter, nestled between Amy and me. Little Vivian clung to my arm, chatting away like any young child. A lump formed in my throat. "Dad, we need to have a serious conversation," Amy said. "I owe you a lot of apologies. I was foolish and self-centered. I never realized how much it hurt you when I left to be with Mom." "No need to apologize. I'm proud to see how you've turned your life around and built a wonderful family. I also understand now that you needed your mother all those years ago, and she needed you too. I'm just sorry that both of you were taken advantage of by that James guy." "But Dad," I interjected, expressing, "I'd like to be a part of your new journey, if you'll accept me. I've made my fair share of mistakes in our relationship, and I'm eager to make amends. We have much to talk about. I pray I never encounter that James again. His lies destroyed my mother, and his depravities and prohibited substances nearly destroyed me. If it weren't for Frank finding me, I might still be in jail or worse. It took 4 attempts before I conquered my addiction. Frank was my saving grace. His love propelled me past the final hurdle. Now little Vivian is my motivation to stay clean. There's so much I want to impart to her as her mother." Amy wept during most of our journey, not from sorrow but from a newfound sense of belonging. It seemed she finally found closure. Throughout dinner the following day at their apartment, and in the days to come at my hotel, we conversed. We spoke openly for the next month, reconciling years of pain and solitude. Eventually we attributed all our issues to my late wife and her treatment of me. We reached a consensus that Wendy was self-centered, caring only for her own desires. While outwardly beautiful, she lacked depth. Yet, despite everything, I still longed for her. I knew no one could replace her in my heart. Amy came to understand that I wasn't the villain her mother portrayed me as, but rather a man far greater than my late wife ever acknowledged. At one point in our talks, Amy looked at me and asked, "Do you still love her, Dad?" It still stings when I recall the disdain she had for me. But you're right. I suppose a part of me still does. I wasn't weak. I loved her wholeheartedly, but long ago she wounded me deeply. I did what I had to do to protect myself from her destructiveness. About 2 months after our reconciliation, our lawyer surprised us during dinner one evening. He brought up Wendy's ashes, which had been sitting on a shelf in his office for quite some time, and asked us what we wanted to do with them. The question hung heavily in the air, causing a palpable silence at the table. It was broken only by my granddaughter's poignant plea. "I want a grandmother." Amy and I exchanged looks, understanding the weight of the moment. "Dad," Amy began tentatively, "when Mom passed away, I was in prison. I never got the chance to say goodbye. But now, after meeting you and hearing your side of the story, there are things I need to say to her, even if they are not easy. Can we retrieve her ashes?" "All right," I responded, contemplating. "There are things I need to say too, but I won't apologize for what I did. After enduring years of pain from her before her death, she got what she deserved." "Dad, I'm not saying you were wrong," Amy assured me. "They got what they deserved, including me. I've been terrible to you, and it took hitting rock bottom in prison to realize the extent of my mistakes and start changing my life for the better." Frank interjected, "Dad, I met her while she was working as a counselor at a halfway house. I was there for rehab due to my drinking issue. She was on her way out, and that's when I fell for her. She helped me overcome my alcohol addiction, and I supported her through her own struggles with getting clean. We've been inseparable since then." Eventually, we all decided that Vivian should have some connection with her grandmother, even if it was just visiting her grave site. It would also provide Amy and me with a place to channel our anger towards Wendy. Later that day, we retrieved the urn from my lawyer's office. Placing it in the trunk of the Bentley, I recalled how Wendy never enjoyed sitting in the back seat due to car sickness. I hoped stowing the urn in the trunk would amplify the impact. I suppose I still harbored some negative feelings towards my late wife. We relocated to Virginia, where I purchased a small farm on the outskirts of a major city. Together with my son-in-law, we decided to raise a handful of horses and operate a modest stable where urban dwellers could board their horses and enjoy riding in a rural environment. Eventually, Wendy's ashes would find their resting place in a quaint family burial plot situated on our farm. This plot contained the remains of a family from the mid-1800s who had once owned a portion of our property. We tidied up the plot and enclosed it with a small picket fence, leaving space for additional graves. Finally, I arranged for a headstone to be crafted for Wendy, bearing the inscription, "Wendy Adams, 1956 to 1,995 inches, victim of cancer. She will be deeply missed by all who loved her. We all forgive you." Over the passing years, I observed that my granddaughter often spent time with her books in that little graveyard. One day, I inquired why she was drawn to it. "Grandma communicates with me and helps me with my reading," she said casually, as though it were a common occurrence. "Grandpa, she's expressing her regret for hurting you. She promises to make it up to you someday. She also mentioned that she now recognizes your goodness and hopes for your forgiveness. She's wondering if she can wait here in the cold and dark until it's your time. Then she'd like to accompany you into the light, so she can be with you forever." A small voice in my head added, "By the way, William, nice attempt, but I don't get carsick anymore." I fell to my knees and embraced Vivian tightly. "Grandpa, why are you crying?"